Snaps our fingers, those boys know what to do, respond.
Well, I think all of us respected the house mother. We respected them like we did our mothers, and we tried to do what was right. But like Johnny said, they did teach us a lot. We didn't necessarily know the best manners when we came up here.
Did some of us have straws still sticking out of our
We
own?
might have.
Mom Allison was the house mother when the time you're talking about, manager. And I was social chairman, and she'd catch me mixing the punch with my hand because I was in a hurry. And so she always had a little separate container. But one thing I remember about it, she'd look at the girls we brought up there, and she'd say, "So-and-so's girl is not our kind."
Yep.
That meant he had a red-hot dick.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what she'd say. We really don't think that's your type.
Well, one of the house mothers, we didn't have a house mother, well, toward the end there, but one of the house mothers sometime a little later than that, was her husband was a professor at Georgia on ag. He was an AGR, and she came and she was absolutely great. And I can't think of her name now. She did more for this fraternity because she was there all the time. She knew AGR. She had a lot of class. She'd been in AGRs all her life. And do y'all remember her name? I've got it written down in that book.
Bannister, was that?
No.
But she was really fine because we had a house mother. Y'all had a house mother after that. I was alumni president for 10 years during the 60s and 70s, 10-year period. And so I kept up with a lot of them. We had one that turned out to drink a little too much, and that caused some problems. And she wasn't the best house mother we had.
One thing I'd like to explore, you heard a while ago about the invitation that Lewis read off there, inviting you to the cocktails in the basement here of the fraternity house. Max never gave up trying to organize the alumni group, and for a period of time, and there maybe 10 or 15 years, we were completely inactive. The alumni was. I think basically the loud music and the different ways affected us. And so Max called me up, says, "We got this motel, the Hampton Inn, which some of us are staying at today out here, and we're gonna have 100 people there, you know." I said, "Boy, this sounds good, Max." And he said, "I've lined up football tickets, and I've got 2 Greyhound buses coming to take them up." And I said, "Great." And so we got there, and the crowd was slow accumulating. And finally, just before football time, there were 7 of us there. And the 2 buses were sitting out the lot. And I looked at Max and I said, "I'll pay for one if you pay for the other." But that has grown from that time to where you have over 100 out there now for homecoming.
And Max keeps it going.
Max kept it going.
Yeah.
Some of the younger people, I'm not talking about us, but the younger people probably would like to know how things were in the 50s. Of course, none of us had cars. I think Brett had a car. But I rode a bus home one time, and it took me forever to get home. And I hitchhiked from then on. And you could hitchhike from Knoxville to Shelbyville a lot quicker than you could ride a bus. Back then, you could have a little UT on your suitcase and set it down, and the first vehicle that passed would pick you up. It was just no trouble to hitchhike. Now, I might say a word or two about Knoxville being dry, alcoholic beverages at that time.
Yeah.
Of course, we were all farm boys, and we were raised not to drink alcohol at all, or if you did, very little. Definitely don't get drunk. And I think we pretty well adhered to especially the latter. But you couldn't buy liquor in Knoxville. But there was a bootlegger who would give curb service. And if you wanted to get something, you'd call him and order it.
That was the basis of some of these fortunes.
Yeah. And he would say, "Well, just be out on the sidewalk. I'll be there in 5 minutes." And somebody would collect the money, go out on the sidewalk. Here he had come, pay him, and that's the way. Of course, we didn't do a lot of that, but we did a little bit of that.
Brent and
Well, he
I,
had his own parking place out there, he reserved. But that number, I remember Charles mentioned that, there was numbers, written by the phone. His number was probably letters that big, and the rest of them was just regular letters. It was used often, but I didn't do anything like that.
Brent and I had a little business for a couple of years, bootlegging, and we had a pledge, and I can't remember his name, but he was our runner. He did all our delivery work, and he flunked out. About a year and a half later, I got a letter from him from a radar site in northern Alaska, and he called me things in that letter my mother would not have appreciated.
I need to inject a little bit of a personal thing into it. We're talking about the house mothers, and I could go back before any house mother. I just enlisted in the Air Force and then was commissioned 3 years later as a fighter pilot and had my wings and commissioned. Down at Panama City, Florida, the first thing I had to do was buy a new Chevrolet convertible, $1,875 total. Never forget it, cheaper than nowadays. But first weekend I drove up to Knoxville. The place I loved most of all was Alpha Gamma Row House, the old house. I went right over on Saturday when I drove up, having a big party. And lo and behold, here was this beautiful girl teaching these crude country boys how to eat ginger snaps and drink cider because they couldn't afford anything else. I later married her, but 50-some years later, we're still married. But Betty was our first pink rose of Alpha Gamma Rho chapter, and that's the way she earned it, by being a loyal friend and teacher how to be proper and socially right to this group and more.
I remember those ginger snaps and apple cider.
Yeah, that was all they could afford.
That's right.
And again, talking about what you could afford, working at the cafeteria, I remember somebody mentioned we got a meal for each hour. That was the good buy. We usually didn't try to use our hour up eating. I remember how many fried oysters I could carry out in my white coat pocket and eat them on the way out through the door and not waste an hour because we got paid 15 cents an hour wages for all over the hours we ate. So I wanted those 15-cent payments.
What did a meal cost at the cafeteria then?
I never paid for one, I don't know.
About 35 cents,
that
I
big.
think.
35 cents.
I think you could eat at the farm. Mabel ran the kitchen out at the farm all that time, and was it a quarter or 35 cents?
35 cents, I think.
But you remember, minimum wage in 1949 was 30 cents an hour, and they increased it, 40 cents an hour, I'm sorry. They increased it in 1950, the year we moved in the house, to 70 cents an hour. So a meal being 35 cents an hour, that's still almost an hour's work out on the open market. So it was a good buy, but still wasn't much as it sounded like it was.
I'd like to say one thing about down during my years after I got out of the military and I was in the grain business for a number of years, and then I got into the sales business and was a sales manager for a number of years. And I had the opportunity to hire quite a few people, and I hired a lot of AGRs, and I'll have to say I never made a mistake on an AGR. There was one who wasn't really cut out to be a salesman, but he now is making a tremendous success in other work, and we both realized it early, but I was just always, if it was an equal resume in that AGR.